Okay, so the day many of us have waited for has finally come. Victoria 3, the Half-Life 3 of Paradox Games, has finally been announced. It's hard to believe that it has been a decade since Victoria 2 was released to a pretty cold reception, but eventually grew to be one of the most appreciated titles among Paradox games. So what do we know about the game? Actually, not that much, and during the announcement, the project lead, Martin Wiz Anward, said that it is too early to talk about release dates or concrete and finished content. But a Steam page already exists for the game with screenshots, so I've decided to take this opportunity to go over these screenshots and see what we can learn from them. Of course, everything being said in this video is pure speculation since we won't know for sure until the game is released. Let's get started. So before we get to talk about the screenshots, I want to drop a couple of notes about the potential modding aspects of the game. Imperator Rome seems to share a lot of its mechanics with Victoria 3. The game has a robust trading system, an in-depth political system that is different for various countries, and of course, it has pops. I think that when it comes to modding Victoria 3, its syntax is going to be very similar to Imperator Rome in many ways. The map itself even looks pretty similar to Imperator Rome, but that is beside the point. Of course, once the game is released, the Iron Workshop will be your #1 source for modding Victoria 3, so hit that subscribe button to be notified once the first Victoria 3 modding video is out. Another thing that we should consider is that Victoria 3 is probably one of the most complicated projects for Paradox to do right, for two main reasons. First, the hype built around the game and the insanely loyal player base has a very clear expectation of what they want from the game. Second, pop mechanics by their nature generate a lot of data and information. Making all of that data easy to understand and interact with is no easy task. We also have to remember that Imperator Rome also deals with these aspects, and the game did not manage to do it well. I recently purchased the game since it was on sale, and while I think it's an amazing game, the reason it failed probably has a lot to do with how it presented all the information to the player. But I have to say I'm optimistic about this, since Martin, the project lead for Victoria 3, has been working on Stellaris. And Stellaris also features pops and actually does a good job at presenting the information about them in a clear and easy to understand way. The trailer for Victoria 3 doesn't feature any gameplay footage, so there's not much information we can extract from it. That is why let's go ahead and skip directly to the screenshots. In the first screenshot, we see the British Isles and the island of Ireland. The map graphics are gorgeous, and I expect that system requirements might be a bit higher for this game than they are for other Paradox games. Let's start from the toolbar to the left. The first button we have there probably takes us into the politics screen. The one after that is for the management of your economy. The next one probably has something to do with industrialization and building of factories. The next button is for trade, and the one after that is for managing your armies. The dove icon is obviously for diplomacy, and the one below that is for research and inventions. The next button is probably a dedicated culture management screen, which allows us to deal with the various minorities in our country, since Victoria 2 is set in an age where we had global empires that contained a lot of minorities in them. The one after that is probably for the management of the various stratas or the classes in our country. And the last button is probably the ledger button. Not sure what the button with the two arrows actually does, but it seems like it's a button used to refresh something, or maybe it removes the toolbar. I'm not really sure. Now above this we have the country flag and the country rank, which doesn't seem to display individual scores for industry, prestige, and the military like it did in Victoria 2. but those might be available if you hover over this indicator or if you click it and it probably opens some kind of an interface. I will get to the particular windows in a moment, but first I want to cover the overall interface. In the center of the screenshot, we have a notification bubble, which probably works the same way it does in CK3, where it stores important information for the player, and once you click it, it opens it and shows various aspects that require your attention or that you may want to change. The notification next to that is probably a notification about a discovery. No doubt it opens a window once clicked. To the right, we have our good old date indicator, game speed, and game menu buttons, as well as a button, the book icon, that is probably used to display game hints. Below that, we have the outliner with all kinds of information. Now let's focus on the bottom portion. Here we see a very significant change to the way the minimap has been reworked. First of all, it doesn't seem like there is a persistent minimap anymore in the game. And I think that's a good change, since most players use the main world view to navigate to other parts of the world. So removing the minimap clears up quite a bit of real estate on the screen that can be used for other things. From the left, we have a search function that will most likely allow us to search for a province or a region. The buttons after that are probably map mods that switch the main view to display other types of information. And the last button might be used to open a minimap, but I suspect that it might actually open a globe that will allow us to switch to other areas on a big globe, which is much more fitting for a game set in the Victorian era. If you think about it, the interface seems very similar to the one in Stellaris and Imperator Rome. It is not surprising that Martin used the Stellaris interface for inspiration. Stellaris also features a galaxy view map, which reinforces my belief that round map button will open up a globe screen that allows us faster navigation and even more information-packed view of the world than the old minimap. Now let's take a closer look at the map itself and see what we got there. The map is divided into regions, just like many of the new Paradox games. The capital has the country flag, and next to it is an indicator that shows low public order, perhaps? Revolts seem to have their own icons, like the ones we have above Northern Ireland. So who knows what this icon means? Let me know your best guess in the comments below. Another addition we can see in this screenshot are what seems to be trade routes, very similar to the HOI4 and EU4 trade route indicators, which might suggest that Victoria 3 will have a country-to-country trade system instead of the Victoria 2 country-to-world market trade system. This could be a good change, since the country-to-world market system had its limitations and did not allow things like embargoes against a particular country or the ability to set tariffs on goods coming in from a chosen country. Alright, so now that we have covered the basic interface buttons, let's see what we can learn from the windows that open up once we click these buttons. In this screenshot, we see what seems like a region information screen, which opens up when you click on a region you control. At the top, we have 3 tabs. Overview seems to give a lot of information, but there is an additional information tab. So it's possible that in the overview panel, we can interact with the region, while the information tab will only show information. Let's take a closer look at the Overview tab. Just like in Victoria 2, every region seems to have its own level of infrastructure, but a new feature seems to be that the region has its own taxation level. In Victoria 2, taxation was on a national level. Perhaps in Victoria 3 we will be able to change taxation levels for each region individually. Another new type of data is the introduction of GDP. This suggests that Victoria 3 might actually have a more in-depth economic system than Victoria 2. This is great to see, but can also be alarming a bit, since this will require the AI to be smart about how to handle such a complex economic system. Every region now also seems to have its own level of access to a market. I'm not sure if this is the internal market of your nation or the world market, but I assume it would make sense to be the latter, since this value could be affected by things like naval blockades or distance from a port for landlocked regions. Infrastructure usage might represent how effective your rail network is in this region, which would make a lot of sense since building complex and fast rail network on a flat terrain is much more feasible than in a region that has many hills and mountains, or other elements of nature that could damage the infrastructure. Right below, we have various buildings that the region contains. These buildings seem to have their individual levels, but there is also a number right next to these categories of buildings. I'm not sure what these numbers represent, but I suspect that these might be pop numbers that work with these buildings. Moving on, we have the population information. Turmoil is probably similar to militancy in Victoria 2 and shows if the local population has a reason to rebel. Not sure what standard of living means. In Victoria 2, pops had various needs that they needed to fulfill, so this might be something similar. The numbers below seem to show the amount of pops and their standard of living. And to the right, the amount of peasants, Victoria 2 farmers probably, that live in this region. And right below that, we have the overall population amount and by how much the population has grown and how many have migrated out of this region. Alright, so that is all the information that I personally can extract from this screenshot. Now let's move on to the next screenshot. The next screenshot shows us the trading interface. The big 100% indicator at the top is probably an indication of the access to this market of the country we are viewing the market for. Since the country being played is China, it obviously has 100% access to its own market. Next, we are shown the top 5 underproduced goods in our country. These are probably goods that are required by the population and our factories that the country does not produce enough of or does not produce at all. Alongside that, we can also see the resources that are overproduced in our country. Below that, we seem to get a glimpse of a new trade route system, which suggests that we can set up trade routes manually, a feature which is very similar to Imperator Rome. If trading in Victoria 3 is indeed done on a country versus country level, it would make sense to get a list of the top 5 trading partners of the country, but that might be hidden in the Open Chinese Market Details button. This screen is probably very limited because we are looking at our own market. If it was open on another country, we could probably see more information and toggles, like a tariff slider, and this makes me wonder if we will actually be able to set tariff levels for individual countries, which could be a powerful economic tool against other countries. Okay, so unfortunately that is all we get for the trading interface in this screenshot, and there are no other screenshots yet regarding trade, so let's move on to the next one. The next screenshot takes us into the politics screen. This screen contains 3 tabs, with the reforms tab being open. These reforms seem very similar to the Victoria 2 reforms, and will probably have a similar effect on the game. Judging by the scroll bar, there doesn't seem to be a lot of categories for them, but each category seems to have 5 possible reforms. To the left, we see something which looks similar to the administration efficiency of Victoria 2. But in this case, it seems you will need to invest political power to increase the efficiency of the country's bureaucracy, which in turn probably improves taxation and other elements of your country. In the final screenshot, we are taken to the Overview tab of the Politics screen, and it's a juicy one. Let's start from the left. As I said a couple of times during this video, Victoria 3 seems to base a lot of its systems on those that were introduced in Imperator Rome, and one of these are the interest groups. This is a whole new feature that was not present in Victoria 2, and is a great addition since many countries in the Victorian era had powerful lobbies that were sometimes essentially running the states than the other way around. The chart on the left might be showing the amount of influence each group has on your nation. These interest groups seem to be color-coded, which should make them easy to identify in the various parts of the interface. Another great addition is the fact that the country leader now seems to have an avatar. Paradox have started the process of humanizing their games after the release of CK2, so Victoria 3 is no exception. The ruler now seems to have certain traits which will no doubt have an effect on the country as a whole and individual aspects of it as well. While we can't expect a character system as in-depth as CK3, it is a nice addition that will bring more flavor to each country in the game. Below that, we see our form of government, the date of the next election, and what seems to be an indication of how many of your pops can actually take part in the election. In Victoria 2, countries that had elections did not automatically grant the right to vote to all members of the population, for example women. So it is likely that this portion of the population will start demanding the right to vote as the game moves forward. Right below that are what seem like political parties that are taking part in the election and their measure of popularity among those who are allowed to vote. Note that the characters have a different color to their background, which indicates their ideology, which can be seen on the right portion of the screen. In the center, we see a value representing the legitimacy of the government. Not sure how this value is calculated, but it may be affected by the various interest groups in the country and their level of satisfaction with the government. A low legitimacy will most likely lead to revolts and uprisings. Below that are shown what seem to be factions in the country that do not have a political party associated with them, but perhaps have a large presence in the country and must be taken into account. To the right, we get a breakdown of the various interest groups, their name, their influence, perhaps determined by their hold on the various political parties. Each of these seem to have a character associated with them, which leads me to believe that there will be a way to negotiate with each group and give concessions. A much more interactive way to do this than what we had in Victoria 2, that gave us little options dealing with hostile interest groups. Each interest group seem to have their own agenda and goals, which they are probably going to be pushing for. So this interface really seems to lay out these goals in a clear way, which is something that was missing in Victoria 2. Okay, so that was a lot of ground to cover, but just from observing these screenshots, I have already learned quite a bit. Victoria 3 is a game that I'm very excited for, and hopefully we are going to get a feature-packed game that won't be broken up for the sake of future DLC. Crusader Kings 3 is an example for a game that was great on release, but lacked so many features of its predecessor. Paradox intentionally left out so many of the features they introduced in CK2 that the game feels very barren after playing it for a couple of weeks. How could a character-driven game not have an inventory system, for example? A feature that was in CK2 and was sadly cut out of CK3, but I have no doubt will be making back its way into the game as a DLC. There are some big questions remaining with regards to features we are used to from Victoria 2. How are Great Wars going to be handled? Will the Victoria 2 crisis system be making a comeback? This mechanic, which was introduced in the Heart of Darkness DLC, was an incredible way to simulate what is known as the Concert of Europe, a diplomatic system that held European powers in check and was used to reduce tensions and quiet down conflicts before they could erupt into major wars. How is colonization and the scramble of Africa be represented in the game? Will there be a Yellow Prussia DLC? All of these questions will need answers, and I will be following the development of Victoria 3 much more closely than any other title. Subscribe to the channel to be notified once I release new videos. If you found this one helpful, give it a like so that others can see it as well, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Cheers.